Okay, so thank you guys for taking the time to be here for your evening. Uh, I know a lot of you are joining from Europe, and so I know after dark isn't normally the time that you guys are joining for these kinds of things. I'm going to be talking about horrific gender dysphoria, identity and body, and fear and hunger termina. My name is Dylan Maroney. I use they, them pronouns interchangeably with she, her every now and then. And so. Uh, oh, and of course, I'm a fourth year PhD candidate over at Georgia State University here in the States. If you have any questions that don't come up in the chat afterwards, or if you want to message me privately about the game, abjection, monstrosity for a reading list of things that I did in preparation for this presentation, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to answer anything that you might have. That said, uh, we do have a couple of trigger warnings for this presentation, as well as what would be the same similar trigger warnings, as well as an additional few if you were interested in playing this game. And so we are going to talk a bit about phallic imagery, sexual assault, addiction, stalking, religious trauma, the usual kinds of things for horror that we might see in similar presentations. Within this presentation, we're going to be tackling a lot of different things. We're going to talk a bit the lore of the world of fear and hunger, just to kind of set up the sociocultural circumstances that this world is under, the premise for the story for Termina, or of the story for Termina. I'm going to describe the process of moon scorching and flesh pillars, concepts that exist within the world of the game, but need defining and explanation in order to better understand them. And then we will jump into more of the queer and feminist theory that I'm using to define abjection and monstrosity, see abjection as a trajectory toward monstrosity in two different circumstances. I will offer you guys my framework for analyzing abjection and monstrosity, and then we will finally jump into one of the character stories in this game, which is a very small part of it in comparison to the plethora of other areas of analysis that we might have. So we'll talk about Marina's story as an allegory for the in-betweenness and acts of becoming that trans people experience. And then we will talk about Marina's abjection and monstrosity in relation to Marina as a woman, more specifically Marina's abjection in a sociocultural context. And then we'll talk about Marina as a monster and how it both resists our interpretations of gender dysphoria and monstrosity, in addition to how it also sometimes might reify those same concerns that we have. And so when we jump into the lore of fear and hunger, the biggest things that we need to talk about are the biggest concepts in the universe of that world, which would be the old and new gods. The old gods exist as cosmic representations for core concepts that humanity experiences and what the world experiences. So going from the top left to the bottom right, we have three of the lesser old gods, you might say. Venushka, who is the god of nature, the moon god Rare, who we're going to talk a lot about throughout this presentation, who exists as a sort of god of quote unquote truth, but this as a result of his or its or their uh, pure hatred for humanity, looks at humanity upon its truth for what humanity is, as opposed to the truth of what humans experience. So very much like a universal capital T truth, as opposed to the subjectivity that we're going to talk about at the core of abjection and so on and so forth. Then we have the god of fear and hunger, who is the embodiment of the strife that propels human progress forward, particularly during the Middle Ages, where fear of your neighbors, hunger and the need for resources drove people towards violence and towards putting people in lesser positions in order to elevate themselves. And then we have two of the biggest concepts in this universe who embody this phallic imagery that I was talking about, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. But we have Sylvian, who is the god, or previously the goddess in the first game, that is related to creation. And then we have Grogeroth, who is seen as this cosmic entity of destruction. In the case of both of these, in all of these individual pictures, each one of these is a book written by a character within the world of the game. And so through them, we can do some visual analysis to understand what precisely these images might represent in terms of the social and cultural practices within this world. And so this fixation on phallic imagery, and then in the case of Drogorath, this focus on violence towards women through phallus, uh, reflects an idea of spirituality and religiosity that has influenced the culture in a way that presents a male or masculine hierarchy. And so this is in contention with what humans are doing at the same time. We have these old gods have started to fall out of influence at the expense or at the arrival of what has been referred to in the game as like true ascended humans. So we have Almer, who is a Christ-like figure who has become the embodiment of human compassion and love for your fellow man, while at the same time is seen as a god that demands sacrifices, that in return, in exchange for blood, you gain some sort of benefit in return for your service to him. And then we have the god of fear and hunger, like I mentioned, who ascends in the first game and plays a massive role in the context for why the events of this game are happening in the way that they are. And then we have the new gods, who are humans who have sat upon a thing called the Throne of Ascension, which is a sort of booby-trapped MacGuffin where they have limited influence. They are chained to this ancient city where they have limited influence over humanity and become, in a way, a symbolic representation of what they see themselves as. So where we see Rare as a inverse of, oh, humanity is disgusting and grotesque, and I'm going to make them look as such and behave as such. The new gods have a very similar sort of trajectory, where in the case of these last two, the Fellowship, which are four new gods that ascended before the first game, and influenced the character Lagarde to go to the ancient city of Mahab, and in his sitting upon the throne, ascends to what is referred to in the game as the Yellow King. If you are a fan of various different science fiction and Lovecraftian horror, then you'll probably recognize the general idea of this. But he was tricked into helping the prior new gods Nilvan exact her plans to usurp the old god's power. Her daughter is the one who ascends to as the god of fear and hunger. And Lagarde, seeing this and having been tricked, uh, recognizes that he has failed to rise above humanity's station. And so he leaves the city of Mahab with this godlike power and then becomes the Yellow King and then Kaiser, which is essentially Hitler in this world. And he spreads death and destruction to meet his goals to try to advance humanity above the influence of these old gods and new gods alike. Which brings us to what he's doing in this game now. And so we have a couple of competing groups and individuals who are vying for influence over the influence of the traces of the old god rare, the sudden appearance of the sulfur cults, this grotesque looking thing, is a the side of Almer that Almer had to abandon. So he abandoned aspects of himself in order to become this symbolic entity of love and compassion. But to do so, he had to remove all of his hatred for humanity in one way or another. And by removing that hatred, it becomes an ultra-violent uh, insistence upon spilling blood for the sake of it just creating chaos and violence. And so the Sulfur Cult are using Rare for their own goals. They have followed Rare to this small town of Preheville in Bohemia in Eastern Europe, and Lagarde, using this same entity, this same power, tries to use technology to connect humanity together into one shared consciousness. No different than Reddit or 4chan or us on this Zoom call here. And then this is complicated by the Nameless Liberty Underground Resistance's sudden appearance in Preheville, and in the case of one character, beats Lagarde to the punch. Once again, Lagarde has failed to ascend beyond, and so dejected and starting to lose his own sense of his humanity as he's already abandoned so much of himself, we come to what is actually happening to the people of Preheville. With all of these different groups acting in their own interests, the GIF should be playing. Okay, it's just not going to, or it might on your end, but it's not on my presenter notes. Rare's hatred, like I mentioned, of humanity manifests through a process of becoming. That it Rare strips away your flesh, and then you become something new. What's supposed to be represented here is one of the early experiments that the Bremen Empire, the empire that Kaiser is, or Yellow King, or Legard, uh, is actively a part of, and they're doing experiments on the civilians of Preheville to see what Rare's influence is doing to them. And so it Rare puts people into this transitory state of being. And so where this individual might have been an actual person with loved ones and a family, friends, interests, hobbies, all of that fun stuff. Rare has taken this individual who serves as a police officer or a Bobby in Preheville. And so in this process of Rare exposing the truth of this individual takes this individual, his head starts violently shaking, and then when you encounter similar enemies in the game, they are extremely violent. They attack you on sight with multiple batons, and they're impossible to communicate with. The constant oscillating back and forth of the head being the hypervigilance of the state. And so we have an individual who has become essentially the worst aspects of what we see in policing and surveillance, certainly here in the US, but also abroad in other countries as well. And this finally leads us to this idea of abjection and monstrosity that I'm focusing on throughout this presentation. In in writing The Body from Abject to Subject, Alison Kimmich talks about three different scholars' understanding of abjection, going from Butler to Gross to Kristeva. If you're familiar with the names, it's great. If not, it's okay. And they all identify the abject as something that simultaneously occupies positions both inside and outside the body. So you may have these characteristics, these traits within you, but once Rare starts tearing away the flesh, these aspects of the body escape, and usually the face splits apart, and the face being this representation of self, becomes an extremely important crux for how we understand what Rare is actually doing to these people. And so this idea of abjection, of putting you in between things, is something that we're going to talk about extensively in the rest of this presentation. Uh, when Kristeva was originally defining abjection and the powers of horror, she defined it as a casting out of aspects of the self that are reviled, sometimes or oftentimes at the sacrifice of your identity. And so when something is cast out, abjection is positioned as inherent contradictions. So that might be a feminine identity in a masculine body, a desire and perversion, bodily fluids and disgust for something that was once a part of you. And so if you go and you vomit right next to you, that thing that was once a part of you, that was an integral, important part of your being for digestive purposes, is now something different, is something else. And so you as the individual still have your sense of self, and you are reviled, disgusted by this thing that is external to you. However, abjection isn't just an individual process, but a psychological process among individuals where somebody might cast aside a part of themselves, identify themselves as a deject in society, and then seek to compartmentalize their identity to the point of corruption, which is what Kristeva ends up calling the most natural aspect of abjection. So that corrupted self might be a progressive despot, or somebody who curbs other suffering for their own profit, or an artist who practices their art as a business. In each one of these cases where a progressive, we can say Lenin, Stalin, uh, start exhibiting fascistic behaviors at the expense of the people with good intention. And in the same case, if you are causing suffering to others and profiting off of it, or I'm sorry, curbing others' suffering. So in charity, if you're profiting off of a charity, that's a contradiction. And then somebody who is practicing art identifies as an artist, but they have to cast aside aspects of that identity in order to engage in capitalistic systems where they have to engage in business practices. And so we have these people who have been placed in this in-between state, whether it be in these very direct examples, or it can be things like gendered bodies, queer people, and so on and so forth, But monstrosity seems to challenge these arbitrary categorizations that are inherent to abjection. So monstrosity is already seen as being a resistance towards abjection in one way or another. Uh, the scholars that I've been reading about, they talk about things like centaurs, Medusa, these beings that are between beast and man, which resist categorization but become something entirely new as a result of it. And so somebody looking upon these things, with using Medusa as an example because Medusa is seen as horrific mythology, it is still an individual being trying to retain their identity in opposition to the hierarchical forces that have put them in this position. And so Medusa is cast out from society, but has this new identity that's in between these things. And so monsters challenge this objection by blunting cultural categorizations that lead to loss of identity, identifying as a non-binary person, as a genderqueer person, as a trans person, allows you the means to identify yourself, still categorizing yourself, but still resisting the dichotomies that are being presented by most cultures and most social practices. When we start thinking about that in the context of gender and culture a little bit more, we get to this idea of, that Wilson talks about in regards to abject bodies that deviate from cultural norms and have reduced cultural importance. The example that he gives is, once again, queer bodies in one way or another. So homosexual bodies, for example, being seen as less valuable than heterosexual bodies during the AIDS crisis. And as a result of that, they had much larger numbers of people who were permanently disabled or killed by the casting out of individuals who had diseased bodies and who had queer bodies because they didn't align with the fundamental categorizations of the state. And so it's a convenient way of offloading these people who don't align with the sociocultural practices of the community that they belong to. And so normative gender expectations in relation to those bodies helps give rise to a proliferation of the other. So when we try to place so many categories on things, these bodies that resist categorization and abjection end up leading to numerous new ways of defining the body within existing social codes. And so people end up calling themselves things like tomboy, lesbian, drag queen, transgender persons, non-binary folks, etc., uh, because there's still a need for classification and a way of communicating that to other people. But these identities are all in between things. Something that challenges traditional femininity, something that challenges heterosexual norms, something that challenges what masculinity is and can be. People who shift between the dichotomy of gender, or people who don't want to be in that dichotomy at all. And so we have all of these various performances that lead to new identities based around existing social codes. And so if we think about femininity as less than masculinity, for example, which is the case in a lot of cultures in our world, then as Miller talks about, uh, they oftentimes will engage in humiliation or shame rituals where the masculine is the giving and the feminine is the receiving. And within these rituals, power begins to lead to self-aggrandizement and further repression of the other. So that abject subject, or abject subject is a bit of a contradiction, I apologize. But the abject person uh, experiences this in the case of, as I mentioned, additional humiliation and shame practices and escalation of violence against them. In these societies, that hierarchy being reinforced through symbolic and bodily exchanges isn't just the physical violence, but also things like verbal violence. So Sam talked about not being verbally abusive, but we have to talk about verbal abuse if we're going to talk about this idea of abjection in the context of gender and culture. And then the bodily exchanges comes in the form of the physical violence. Assault, sexual assault, harassment, uh, murder, right? All of those things. So we also have to talk about gendered violence in that context as well to better understand how abjection is actually working within this individual culture and society. Uh, Molding and Borgvis identify this idea of humiliation and shame with honor societies. So gendered violence and familiar honors and familial honor systems become the norm in these cultures. And because of this idea of honor, you end up having individuals who ascribe themselves to the key tenets of the culture and the social class that they belong to, and as a result, begin engaging in the same gendered violence and familial honor systems that the culture wants them to ascribe to. Kimmich, bringing them back around, uh, discusses this as the designating of some bodies or groups of bodies as contaminated, sorry, irrational or disorderly, which allows those who count themselves among the dominant group, the subjects, the people who still have a sense of identity and self within this hostile environment, to think with relief that that is not me. So going back to the puke example, that is no longer me. In the case of a masculine individual looking at the feminine, that is not me. And then they reinforce these hierarchies and these practices, then they become ingrained in culture because of the significant othering that happens to the people who exist in these cultures. And this brings me to single slide, single quote, and something that I believe encapsulates a lot of what we just talked about, that bodies are already more than we can bear in their treason against our subjectivity, that our bodies causes complication of self and identity, especially when they don't align with the identity that we understand ourselves to be. And so we feel we occupy them, but we are occupied by their irrefutable ownership of us. So this comes down to not just the individual experiencing that lack of bodily autonomy, but we might understand it through the context of things like zombies or things like gendered violence. And so we begin to see abjection as in this trajectory towards monstrosity. And for example, in the film that Jones talks about, Dead Girl, which is described as a film in which a group of boys find a zombie woman, and because she has no bodily autonomy and no sense of self, because zombies are inherently abject between life and death, and lacking the social practices and performances of gender, uh, but they sexually assault her repeatedly throughout the film. And it's played off as a natural part of these boys and their rite of passage towards adulthood. The creator of the film in interviews has been vastly misogynistic about it and refers to the zombie subject as fuckholes. However, we need to think about this from the perspective of gender is not merely performance, but something that we can identify as a woman being subjected to this torment helps us to understand that gender is not merely performance nor individual in the case of the group of boys, but proceeds from the body itself. And when we look at transgendering, that gender isn't simply constructed, but contingent on the body. That the body is not something that we can escape, and therefore we have to contend with what the body is and how that's reflective of the self and identity, and the abjection that puts us somewhere in between how our body reflects ourselves, how we see ourselves, and then symbolically how we exist within a society and culture. But then also, we are people, we are human. Uh, this is seen best, I believe, in the case of people who aren't really monsters at all. In Supernatural, Meg and Anna Milton, a demon and a fallen angel, are dehumanized through social norms, that they occupy women's bodies, and in that they have both intimate and platonic relationships with Sam and Dean, the two main characters of the show, if you haven't seen it. Um, and once they no longer serve in that social position as a woman, they become monster. So once they start to reclaim their power because they're a demon and angel, uh, then they are killed off because they no longer function in the norms of that society. And once you become monstrous, you are no longer seen as human. So they other themselves and in response are killed for it. So this gets us to this idea of abjection as a trajectory towards monstrosity, where transliterature and transness and monstrosity uh, leads us to monstrous acts and structures. Uh, and in the case of transliterature, we see it works following in this approach where they resist simply relocating monstrosity in other bodies or types of persons, and they often focus instead on things that are being done to trans or queer people, or in the inverse of that, what structures are monstrous in nature that oppress trans people in some way or another. And these narratives of transition and reflecting this Kafkaesque body horror interrogate cultural abjection and are centered within histories of racism and colonialism as well. That the idea of the feminine subject and the masculine subject and the dichotomy between them is can be seen throughout history as a reflection of the things that have been done to people in Africa, Asia, South America, and the Middle East, so on and so forth. And so monsters consistently prompt a reorganization of social norms. When you confront something new that you believe to be monstrous, it forces us to reconsider what these categorizations are. Just the same as Medusa challenges traditional categorizations of animal and human, these monsters are reorganizing things like sex and gender, sexual identity, and so on and so forth. And so we come to what Moffat has described in their dissertation, where the monstrative is a new concept where we can see it as a new conception of the relationship between self and the other, where sometimes the self might align themselves with the other and become monstrous for the purposes of surviving in a society, to have better or greater agency over one's life and one's body. And as a result of that, they contend with these cultural and social practices constantly. This brings us to what I've referred to now as a dialectical framework for analyzing abjection and monstrosity. And so we have all of these various different topics that we need to question and discuss to better understand how the game Fear and Hunger is reflecting these ideas of monstrosity and abjection. And so I'm looking at the abject, the monster, culture, bodies, identity, and violence. Whether that violence be something as simple as stalking, verbal harassment, verbal abuse, things like that, up to and including things like murder, rape, and such so forth. And so I'm asking, what are the cultural norms in the world of fear and hunger? We've already seen a few of those in the case of patriarchal hierarchies, and we'll see that ingrained further within the context of Marina and the church. And then how does humiliation in the form of violence result in abjection in this world? How does the abject oscillate between self and other, subject and object, male and woman, and especially in the case of Marina? And how does monstrosity appear in bodies challenging of social norms or represent a dichotomy between the self and other? And then finally, how does the abject reclaim identity or succumb to their dejection from society? And then I want to, in this context of a dialectic, dialectics are generally done with more than one person. If you are questioning your own ideas and then giving answers, you can't actually come to the sort of universal truths that Socrates and Plato were talking about. At the very beginning of the game, before you're allowed to start playing, when that final bit of the cutscene finishes, you are met with this blank screen with the words "monologue with the moon" written on it. I talked a little bit about Rare's influence and how its hatred of humanity uh, makes it believe its representations, its capital T truth of what humans are, uh, is individual to it. It doesn't care about the subjectivity of others. And so it engages not in a dialectic, but a monologue of sorts. And so I want you to keep this in mind when we get to one of the later slides where we start talking a little bit more about Marina's monstrous transformation if you don't end up saving her in the game. And then here's Marina, our main character that we're going to be talking about, who was once upon a time uh, born into the Church of Almer, so that Christ-like figure that we were talking about. And like I mentioned, Almer, rather than having eating the body, drinking the blood, you break the body and you spill the blood. And so for many generations, her lineage took part in the most wicked of rituals, ready to or only to appease gods of a forgotten age. As I mentioned, the traces of the old gods, as well as Almer's waning influence in relation to the god of fear and hunger, has resulted in the church still engaging in things that culturally don't match the subjectivities of the people who are living in Europa at this time. The life of a dark priest, Marina, thanks to herself, is a cruel one, even if modern times overlook the most archaic and ancient rites. A dark priest's life begins and ends in full dedication to the older gods. When we think about the dark priests in this context, they are in the same way as the abject person, abandoning their sense of self to lead themselves not to the abjection, but because they align with the social and cultural practices that are the norm for this society, they become more object than abject. They exist as a symbol or representation of the church, but also of the gods that they worship. And as a result, are also the object by which their influence is allowed to spread in the world. Uh, and it finally mentions there is no place for self in the church. There is no place for identity. And so Marina, as a trans woman, is already resisting these hierarchical structures that the culture that she exists in is placing upon her. Uh, Marina, obviously being born a boy, uh, was shielded from this abandonment of self that she would have been forced to go through by telling Marina's father that a daughter was born instead of a son. And so by hiding Marina from him, uh, Marina was allowed to sort of come into her own body and come into herself in a way that she wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Uh, Marina notes that she was dressed accordingly to her station now as a young woman, and your distant and often absent father didn't get a wind of the original nature of things, or he just denied what was in front of his face. In either case, the subject was never brought up. And so as Marina grows older, finds comfort in this identity that she has been raised into. And so everything felt natural, so who cares? And so we see the subjectivity here that Marina's identity has consolidated, and she has a stronger sense of self than we'll see in one of the other characters here in a second. And as a result, Marina is able uh, to study whatever she wanted to. And so when she goes to the Ministry of Darkness in the Vatican City, she is allowed to do the initiation ceremony, choose which older god she would like to worship, and then finally, as her studies are starting to come to an end as she reaches adulthood, receives a letter from her father telling her that her mom has died and that those words were met with were cold and without sympathy. So this violence towards women that we will talk about, it seems that Marina's father has sacrificed her mother in one of these ancient rituals in order to preserve his own life and protect himself from the influence of Rare, as we'll see in the next slide. And so you tried calling home, but the telephone exchange couldn't connect to any phone in the Prahavilian area. And so Marina travels to the city and immediately begins starting to experience abjection through the lens of being a woman first, before starting to come to this abjection that's instigated upon her by her father, by the church, and by other forces. And so her first encounter is with another girl who was at the Ministry of Darkness in Vatican City, but was in something that they referred to as the Ninth Circle. The Ninth Circle was a secretive organization within the church that did a lot of human experimentation on orphans. And as a result, Samari's body has been subjected to some of the worst rituals imaginable in service of gods like Sylvian and Grogeroth. So Sylvian in the case of things like sexual assault, but then also with Grogeroth, where her body is being broken by priests in order to serve the gods better. Throughout this, Samari develops this ability to read the minds of other people and finds comfort in Marina in particular. that here is this woman who seems confident in herself, but and has friends and is excelling in school and so on and so forth, all the things that Samari wants but isn't able to attain because of her position. And so Samari being abject in the context of the church as a woman is being subjected to these shame and humiliation rituals centered in extreme violence against her, learns that, oh, Marina was born as a boy. I can read her mind. I know everything about her. And so Samari, who is experiencing body dysmorphia, uh, lacks this understanding that there is a difference between that and gender dysphoria. That dysmorphia comes from this idea of delusions that you are different than what your body exhibits. And the breaking of her psyche through these rituals, it makes sense why eventually she turns into this monstrous sort of feminine being. Uh, and so understanding the role of women in the church, that's what she ends up experiencing. But she thinks of Marina as a friend. She finds comfort in Marina sharing a sort of secret or disgust or pain in living in a body that doesn't align with her identity. And so you meet her first when you try to sleep in a bed in this old cottage right outside the city of Preheville. And then you are suddenly woken up by a black-haired girl spying on you at the end of the bed. Up to this point, you've encountered various monsters already, and those monsters are extremely punishing. If you go into combat in this game, you can expect to lose something in return. Some cases, that might be a limb. In other cases, it might be a permanent debuff. And in some other cases, it could be a complete game over that you have no control over, unfortunately. And so this girl appears, and you don't know if you're about to be thrust into combat or not. And as a result of that, you have this dialogue exchange where this Samari is stammering and not able to actually communicate her thoughts. And it seems as if being in a more submissive position in the church that has grown into this extreme shyness or avoidance in engaging with other people. So she apologizes, uh, says, "Oh, Marina, you don't recognize me," because Marina has no clue who this girl is. Samari has been stalking her for years at this point. And so she eventually oh, sorry, says, "I need to go," and then runs off. You don't know where she goes, and you still don't know her name at this point in the game. As soon as you get past this encounter with Samari, if you try to sleep again, I, I keep mentioning sleeping, in order to save the game, in order to confirm your progress, you need to sleep in a bed. And this bed in particular, if you're playing as a feminine character, not necessarily Marina, you will encounter the woodsman, who is wearing a trench coat, carrying uh, uh, what is it, a splitting axe, whatever you cut firewood with, and naked underneath. Uh, it's blurred out for the sake of YouTube. However, what you see attached to him is the equivalent of a face hugger from the Alien franchise. And it detaches itself from him, and you see that his genitalia has been removed. You learn later that his wife had been cheating on him with a cosmic entity in the form of their goat. If you've seen The Witch, uh, Black, uh, Black Phillip, it's quite literally the same goat, essentially. And so the satanic figure who has emasculated him, and then this alien-like being thing has attached itself and seemingly consumed his genitalia. So the woodsman has become abject, that he is between things because he has failed in his masculinity and is starting to succumb to the influence of rare and going crazy as a result of it. But I want to note this because the facehugger throughout media, the Alien franchise, the Predator franchise, even in things like Prometheus and Covenant, acts as a facsimile for rape. That it is a thing that attaches to your face, inserts a phallic object down your throat, and then injects something into you. And you can experience the same thing where it attaches to you, and even if you finish the fight, you take a few steps in the overworld and then you fall over dead, succumbing to that rape. And then finally, in the end of the first act of the game, you are confronted with either Henrik or the mayor. I'm offering his moon-scorched form here to demonstrate the sort of monstrosity that is associated with him. Uh, Henrik in life was a struggled to find a hobby or a passion that he could really align with, and eventually settled on cooking and food as his main passion. However, he's also a raging misogynist. The first time you see him, he is ogling Abella, a feminine engineer, and you see him sexually harassing women throughout this point in the game. And if you're not playing as Marina, you can find Marina in his manor, and before you go and fight him, if you rescued Marina, she will tell you that she doesn't want to see him, that she despises him. And that's because he's locked her away in this room in his manor. And because of that, we can assume that he's engaged in the same shame and humiliation rituals we've already seen. This idea of sexual violence that's been permeated in the idea of stalking, in the idea of unfaithfulness, and how the woodsman then was emasculated through it, and then was made abject physically. His body was altered permanently. Henrik is experiencing the same thing. And in losing his mind and kidnapping Marina and presumably sexually assaulting her, Marina doesn't want anything to do with him and will leave your party before you go and fight him. And so we see Marina's abjection as a woman playing out in a way that is slightly different than if you were playing her yourself. And then this brings us to Marina's social and cultural abjection. And this is seen primarily through Father Domex, the head priest of Almir's church in Preheville, and and Samari, where Samari confronts him, saying, "Oh, you're Father Domek, aren't you? I'm here for your daughter, Marina. Because of her, I'm here because of Marina." And he immediately starts shouting at her. So this idea of verbal abuse and violence that we referred to earlier is being seen now uh, expressed in verbal violence towards Samari. And that's extended when he starts saying, "That person died in my eyes with his mother and their dirty little secret. What a disgrace." So, this idea of humiliation and shame once again, and what a cowardly path to take. In any case, Marina is far away. You won't find her, him here. And so we get to the point where then Samari, he grabs Samari, Samari stabs him in the stomach, and then she keeps going on and on about, "You've put her through so much hardship, what are you talking about?" And then he calls her a dirty whore of Babylon once she stabs him. And so we have this misgendering, violent language against women, dehumanization of women, in this idea of monstrosity, the horror of Babylon, that's being attached to Samari here. And then I have a little quote clip of when Marina talks to Domek as he's on the ground dying, and he calls her a stupid girl and asks her why she came back. She knows better. And then he would send her the letter as a way of ending things, that she can go on and not have to have any ties to this place anymore. Says stupid girl one last time, and then finally dies. And so after this, he falls into the floor in a odd sort of bubbling goo. And it's implied that, and not implied, you'd find out later, that he's in the basement of the church in something that's referred to as a flesh pillar. And so this thing that's attached itself to Marina in her monstrous form when she moon scorches, if you don't save her, if you're playing as another character, or if you sleep too much and you try to save too often, you'll get to the end of the 3 days that you have allotted to you, and Marina will turn into this thing. And so Rare's insistence on revealing the quote unquote truth of humanity in Moonscorching Marina, he captures not her subjection, but abjection, and brings it into physical form. And so the thing that's been then is referred to as the cocoon uh, appears as a writhing mass of limbs with a head squarely placed between spread legs and a flesh-like monolith chained to it. And so this represents a few different things. Its attachment to her father and her father's attachment to the church by literally doing a ritual that binds him to the ground and binds his soul to this flesh pillar, and is in a constant state of becoming. That the idea of multiple limbs and things emerging from her implies that they're maybe more, the cocoon, that there's still transformation that's happening. And in this state of becoming, in the state of being between things, uh, we see Marina's abjection take physical form. And the bioessentialist notion that we see in real life, having this one-to-one relationship of the body between the body and identity, uh, and the genitals being a key indicator of self for Rare. And so Marina, in Moon Scorching, becoming what she fears she is the most, thinks becomes this thing that is entirely represented by phallic objects, whether it be her sense of self being attached to her genitalia, or her sense of self being attached to her father, to the church, and stuck in this state of becoming and not able to realize an identity and a self of her own. She finally succumbs to the moon scorching by Rare. And so, based off of what we've talked about, we can come to conclusions that identity may lead to abjection, which may lead to monstrosity, whether that's in resistance or in or reifying the cultural and social norms of the society. And so those norms are being reinforced through things like insistence on the order of things, Rare's insistence that humans stay in their station, and he makes them monstrous in response if they go above that station. Violence against those deemed lesser in various forms, from stalking to misgendering to physical violence in various forms, the oppression of multiple aspects of the self. So Father Domek is simultaneously oppressing himself by aligning himself so heavily with the church and his insistence on phalluses. Marina's oppression of multiple aspects of herself externally from other people, and the monstrous consequences that Marina experiences, that Father Domek experiences, that Samari experiences, that the woodsman has experienced, for their refusal or inability to adhere to the norms of the society that they live in. But that's it. I have Q&A now. Sources, if any of you want to grab them from the screen, a screenshot real fast, and happy to answer anything related to fear and hunger, abjection, any of that fun stuff.